Hi everyone, this is just a brief demonstration of this next typesetting assignment for our class and giving you just a few tips and tricks of how to go ahead and accomplish the work that is outlined for you on our Canvas page. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you are going to want to download the attached file provided for you that has all the text in it. It is set as an RTF file, which means you can open it in TextEdit, or you can even open it up in Microsoft Word. And all of the text is provided to you here. And all you'll need to do is simply copy and paste the text that we will use for the article. It's easy to do. Some of the formatting will translate and some of it will not. It depends on how your settings are set up on your InDesign and your preferences, but that's not going to matter because you're going to set all of the design and typesetting preferences in InDesign anyway. So even if the formatting, size, font, and all of that stuff does not translate, that's totally fine. What you'll do next is you will copy and paste this into InDesign. And when you do so, you're going to be setting up a new document as specified in our assignment and the screenshots. So if you go to File and you hit New and you hit New Document, you will be able to enter the appropriate specifications as required by this assignment. So make sure that you are following the measurements that are provided on the screenshots. And if you are setting in inches, you can go ahead and just change your units to inches. And if a setting requires that it be set in points or picas, just go ahead and set it here to say points or picas. And most of the settings are one of those two situations, either setting your specifications in inches or in picas, and you can change that unit measurement here. Even if you set your width and your page size with inch marks, when you change your units, it will automatically translate it to what that means in points or picas. So no need to worry about that. Make sure you follow the specifications on the assignment sheet and you'll be ready to get going. And once you do that, you will create a blank document that you can go ahead and get started on. And it'll look something like this. And with this blank document, what you'll see is that you have live area for your text. Anything within that pink area is permissible for your text. Anything outside of this margin would be subject to getting trimmed off, or artwork might cross over to it. So we don't want to place any text into the margin area. We want to make sure all text is within the safety and that it's already assigned with a 2-column format, so it's easy for you to flow your text in. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the already constructed text file, the already constructed InDesign file, so I can review some of the fine-tune details about the typesetting itself. So as I transfer my screen, you're going to see a lot of the information has already been created. So there's a couple things to be aware of. Anytime you are placing text that have different column widths, it's a good idea to use a different container or text container. And we all know how to create our containers for our text, right? We click on our text tool and we can drag and create the block where our text will occur. And then we can type straight into it, or we can copy and paste text into it. So in the case of this exercise, you have one block of text that is set flush right, and it is only a single column wide at the top right. Then you'll have another block of text that will span from left to right of the page, and that will be for your headline and the subheadline. So that would be set in its own text block. And then the block below, you do not need to set two different text boxes for this. This is set in one text block that is assigned with 2 columns. I can change that to 3, and you can see what would happen if I changed it to 3. But in the case of this exercise, we're going to go ahead and stick with 2 columns. And then that way, it's much easier to flow text from one column to the other because you don't have to do any work. The software does all the work for you. A couple other things that you'll see as you start formatting text is how big to make headlines, how big to make subheads, how big to make your body copy. Now, as you've studied in our typesetting etiquette, one of the rules for good typesetting is to be conscious of the number of characters that appear in a single line of text. A reader's eye will get tired from tracking a line of text that's more than about 75 characters. Our eyes will tire. So what that means is if we have type that is a headline that is short, we can make the type big. In fact, if we make the headline very small, it will not be as effective as a headline because the text will be very small and it won't read as the central focus. We want to make sure that our headlines are set nice and wide and nice and large, and that we have good ragging for line breaks. So it wouldn't be a good idea for this one to do this because we would have an orphan alone on its line, and then we would have two words stacked on top of each other, which is also not a good idea. And even if I put for hire down here, the weight of the first line is heavier than the weight of the second line. So the alignment would feel like it's toppling over. So it's always a good idea when you're setting a headline to have the second line be the longest line or the last line be the longest line so the type feels weighted to it. In addition, work made for hire is an expression. So you want to try to keep expressions together because again, if we rag this work made for hire, it would not necessarily read properly as the expression is stated in the article. So again, yes, the subhead can be very large because it is not body copy. It is not part of the article, it is an introduction to the article. So that can again be set very large. And, it could be a little bit larger than this if you want to kind of span it across the page, that's totally fine. But be conscious that it doesn't distract from the headline so that we read things in proper order. You'll also be setting a drop cap. And drop caps usually occur in articles at the very first paragraph of the content. We don't typically put drop caps elsewhere because a drop cap, again, is a focal point that tells us where to start. If I put another drop cap over here, then all of a sudden it's telling me to start again over here, and that becomes a distraction. So we don't want to do that. When you're setting your drop caps, you'll see that in your paragraph setting, it's very simple to do. All you do is you adjust the setting here, that whether it's going to be 2 lines or 3 lines. And in the case of this article, because of the size of the point size of the headline, a 2-line drop cap is nicely balanced and doesn't feel like it's overweighting the headline. Other things that you will be formatting in terms of the text to make this article look professionally typeset is what's called paragraph spacing. So here's an example. The slight distance or difference between text between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 means that there's a tiny bit extra leading between these two paragraphs. There's a tiny bit of extra leading between here and here and here and here. And if there's a list between the list and the next subtopic, there's a tiny bit of extra leading. And the way that we set that is we select the paragraph, and over here on our paragraph setting, we can control the amount of space that occurs after a paragraph. So you'll see when I increase this number, it adds spacing here. But we don't want to add too much because we want to make sure that this article fits. And if we add too much, it will become distracting and start to look like individual stories that are all blocked into one column. So a tiny bit of paragraph spacing is acceptable, More than two, maybe three points is going to be excessive. Another way to distinguish paragraphs when we're setting text is to use an indent. And sometimes you can use an indent without paragraph spacing. Sometimes you can use a combination of both. But generally, we want to use indents when we're setting text in articles like this. Without an indent, it will look confusing. So if I remove the indent from here, I don't know where the next paragraph starts. There's not enough paragraph spacing. And if I add more paragraph spacing, it doesn't flow together well. But by adding an indent and making that indent consistent throughout, then we will clearly understand that this is just a continuation of the article. So as you set indents and paragraph spacing, there are some tips on our Canvas page to help you understand what you're looking for and where you apply it, where you do not apply it. As you'll notice down here, there is no paragraph or indentation between subheads and the first line of a paragraph below it. Generally, you do not do that because, again, we want to make sure the reader sees that these are connected items and not separate items. If the indent appears here, then it will start to look like it's different content. So we don't want to do that at all, if at all possible. Let's correct that. There we go. This looks like the subhead is for something different than it's just like separation device. It doesn't look like it's connected to the continuation of the article. So if you have a subhead, it's generally advised to not have a paragraph indent after a subhead, but every subsequent paragraph after that would have one. And the other thing that you're going to be setting in this typesetting is you'll be setting an indent. A tab. And a tab is not the same as an indent. If you will notice, there is no keystroke. I did not hit the tab key to indent this text. It is defined here under paragraph setting. There is no keystroke in here. If I hit delete, it will join it to the next paragraph. If I hit return, it's going to add a drop cap because it thinks to add a drop cap, but I will correct that and make sure that it is doing what I intended to do. So there is no tab here. A tab is used differently, and I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this a little bit closer. A tab is used differently. A tab is used to format text in addition to an indent. So each one of these line listed elements here, each of them are indented. If I look at my paragraph specifications, you can see that there are indents for every line. But I've also aligned each one of these listed items so that they are equally spaced and aligned to each other. And in some cases, like with point number 1 or item number 1, the item is too long to fit on a single line of text. It has to fit on 2 lines. And if I don't have this tab setting, it will not know how to align it. So if I just hit return, and it's going to indent it. And if I try to space it over, depending on what letter is coming after the space, it will align it differently. We never want to use spaces for alignment. Instead, we hit the tab key, and the tab will align it perfectly because I've marked it. I can adjust the tab. Let me select all the text. I can adjust the tab once I've made it so that if I want to change anything about it, change the positioning, and then I can mathematically determine what this setting is here too, which I've given you a pica count, so you can put in a mathematical number for this left aligned tab. Okay, left justified. There's different ways that you can set tabs. You can set them left justified, you can set them centered, right justified, or you can have a leader between the keystrokes. In other words, you can put a series of dots between tabs. We won't get into that with this exercise, but those are some advanced specifications that you can add. Another thing about tabs is that when we are working with two lines that belong to the same listed item here, we want to remove the paragraph spacing. So we've talked about paragraph spacing here, but we don't want it here because we need to understand this line of text belongs to this line of text. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can select the text and remove the paragraph spacing. That would certainly solve it, but that's not always the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to use a soft return. And the way we do that is you hold the Shift key and you hit return, and then you hit your tab. And what that does is now this line of text will not have the extra spacing that would occur with extra paragraph spacing. So those are just a few of the fine-tune typesetting qualities that graphic designers need to apply to all of their projects. When we are looking at your resume, if a creative director is looking at your resume, if a creative director is looking at your cover letter, creative director is looking at your portfolio, we're going to be looking for these proof that you understand these rules of typesetting and that you can apply them to your work from beginning to end. This is not this is an exercise for our class, but in terms of every project you do from here on out, whether it's in a graphic design class or in a writing class or in a presentation you're doing for one of your studio art classes that requires typesetting, you need to apply this because this is the mark of a professional. And as soon as you graduate, you are no longer a student and your portfolio needs to represent professional work. So taking a look at the outline of all the different criteria that we want to accomplish in setting good text between indents and drop caps and paragraphs and tabs, those are all things to consider. As in every project, always keep an eye on your kerning too, especially with this particular word that has a W and an O next to it. There is going to need to be some kerning applied to this headline. There is no doubt. The recommended typeface that I encourage you to use is Futura. So you can use Futura Bold because it complements nicely with the body text font, which is King's Caslon. King's Caslon is openly available through Adobe Font, so all of you can use the same typeface. But when we're working with geometric sans, we know that in big headlines, we're going to need to do some kerning. For the smaller body text and probably the subheads down here, it's likely that you won't need to worry about kerning because the point size is very small, so it's not necessarily required. And then finally, keep an eye on text ragging. We do not want to have orphans or widows. So I've given a before and after scenario that you'll see on the Canvas page, particularly with this paragraph of what happens when we have an orphan at the end of a paragraph, a single word, or a hyphenated word at the end of a paragraph. We do not ever want to do that, nor would we want to have the type set in a way that would have, I'm going to force it to do this a little bit, that would have a single line like this at the bottom of a column. We don't want to have this, right? This is also an orphan because it is left alone at the bottom. Or we also wouldn't want to have this. Let's see if I can force it to do this again. Oh, I think I have to remove. Let's see, I have to change some specifications to make it do this. There we go. We also don't want to see this happen. This is a widow where there's a single word or a single line at the top of a column That's also poor typesetting. So those are things that as you fine tune the details of your typesetting, you want to make sure that you are being conscious of, and that your work has all the attention to detail that we expect from a professional and from someone who puts on their resume or their cover letter that they have a high attention to detail. This is where you're going to prove it on an exercise like this. So having said that, good luck with your exercise, and I look forward to seeing your work.